Hello, fellow debaters and honorable judge. I'm the PM of today's debate of this House supports the rise of self-care culture. Our side completely stands with this motion. Some points of framing before I move on to my speech. Self-care culture is the action of prioritizing one's mental, physical, and stress levels. In the status quo, self-care culture is not shown as selfishness, but rather actually seen as empathy. Through self-care culture, people can manage their stress and use that to help others more efficiently in their community, society, or even in their family. Our side is not saying the person in status quo will do the self-care activity 24/7 every day, but rather for a relaxation break or activity when they need it or not. So now moving on to our side's first argument, it combats burnout and chronic stress. Burnout and chronic stress is a big problem many teenagers or people go through even in the real world currently, which actually raises suicide rates and depression rates. Judge, you need to understand how big these effects are. The consequences can be even death if serious. That's how serious this is. But on our side, self-care culture is a wonderful way for all people to fight their stress and manage their own private burnout and chronic stress. Some examples of self-care culture are like taking a bath, doing mindfulness activities, and journaling. Judge, you can understand that these activities are all independent, without the need of anyone's help. But you should also understand that even if side opposition rebuts and says these are very selfish actions, they're just wrong. Through these rather selfish actions, they say, all people around them in their society can actually grow too. Focusing on yourself helps calm yourself down and eventually leading to helping others. A fact in this debate is that growing confidence and calmness through these self-care activities are beneficial. Side opposition cannot rebut to this by saying, oh, they're selfish, they're useless. Growing confidence helps grow healthier boundaries and also helps grow leadership, which actually helps lead and support the society around them as well. Growing calmness helps stay calm in all situations and can keep the anger inside of them privately. Judge, there's a pattern in all of these benefits. They all help the society or community while also helping the person himself or herself. So now moving on to our side's second argument. It promotes healthier boundaries for one and the society. Growing confidence and growing calmness ultimately leads to healthier boundaries indefinitely. When someone does journaling every day for a self-care culture activity in the status quo, it will eventually turn into a habit which scrolling every day with scrolling every night with journaling every day before sleeping. They can replace it. When one makes a good habit, they start also thinking that they're calm and mature people, which, like I mentioned before, it can also help control their anger and connect more with neighbors or friends inside their community. This is a genuine way that helps people connect with people in their society. Through self-care activities, they can feel the pleasure of helping their neighbors and supporting them when things are rough for them. Judge, if you think about it, self-care activities doesn't have any negative benefits because first, it doesn't limit your time during the day because like I mentioned or explained in my point of framings, we are using them just for short relaxation breaks throughout the day when people need it. Secondly, it helps a more wider range of people, the society, their family, and themselves, and even more broader categories. And third, it helps them lower their stress hormones, boost their immune system, which helps with their health and with studies because they can focus better in school and in home and in other places. Side opposition needs to clearly prove how these self-care activities actually have negative benefits. Thank you for listening, and I'm very proud to propose on side proposition.
So first I'll start with my rebuttals, then my arguments. So all these positives the prop just mentioned, like self-care helps with burnout and preventing depression. And we agree that self-care is great, but turning into a culture priority that justifies avoidance over it just justifies avoidance over individualism and erosion of responsibility. Because we are fine with people doing self-care. I think that's a good thing. But normalizing it and including it in your routines every day, I think is just doing a bit too much and it just changes your habits and also, like I said earlier, it justifies avoidance, etc. Which I'll make more clear later with my arguments. So, my first argument is that the rise of self-care culture individualized systematic harm. What I mean by this is self-care culture shifts the responsibility for large-scale structural problems onto individuals, making people manage symptoms instead of challenging root causes. Three mechs to this argument then. First, misdiagnosis of structural problems as a personal failure. Issues like burnout, stress, and exhaustion are often caused by external systems, overwork, academic pressure, economic insecurity. However, self-care culture reframes these as individual shortcomings. People are led to believe that they are not coping well enough rather than recognizing that the system itself is unhealthy. This
You know
prevents
what?
yes.
Our prime minister has clearly defined self-care culture as them understanding that external factors like overwork are like the main causes of self-care culture. What is your response to this?
No, because self-care is like doing activities to help burn out, but something like self-care culture looks like a shared social expectation that you must constantly monitor your stress instead of maybe like checking in like once every like 2 months if you feel really stressed at that day. A- And we're fine with having some self-care, but like regularizing it, I think is not really like it's just doing too much. So continuing my second mechanism. So, commodification and quick fix solutions. The rise of self-care creates a profitable wellness industry that markets products as social journal, skincare supplements, or healing tools. This turns self-care into consumption instead of addressing structural issues. Individuals are encouraged to buy temporary relief, creating the illusion of control while leaving root causes untouched.
You know what?
And yeah.
Self-care culture isn't like thinking about like your beauty standards because like that's completely different. We've already our prime minister in this point of framing has already stated self-care culture is caring about yourself and your mental limits, not your physical like appearance.
Yeah, okay. But you get these overwork, like I said earlier, you get these overwork and burnouts because because of these systems. It's not because you just feel like, oh, it's like my fault for feeling too stressed, right? So then that's why we, instead of blaming it on you not doing enough self-care, you should find the systems that cause the root problem. So instead of treating the systems, we find the root problems. Okay, so moving on to my second point, the rise of self-care culture creates an avoidance mindset that weakens long-term resilience. So, three makes this argument. So, self-care culture often teaches people to interpret stress, criticism, or failure as something to be avoided rather than managed. As a result, normal challenges are seen as threats of well-being, so people disengage instead of pushing through. And over time, this lowers their tolerance for stress. Second, on platforms like social media, avoidance behaviors are praised and normalized. This creates a feedback loop where withdrawal is rewarded with validation, making people more likely to repeat instead of developing coping skills. Proud to propose.
Good morning, Judge and opposition team. I would like to start by replying to the opposition team. The opposition team has clearly misassumed about what self-care culture is. Turning self-care into priority justifies erosion of responsibility. That's what the opposition claimed. However, our PM already talked about how it helps people. It helps people help others. You can't serve water with an empty cup. You need to be able to have your own depression figured out, your own problems figured out, to be able to help other people with problems. It's not selfish. It's just taking care of yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally. And also, you don't constantly monitor yourself, your stress. It's accepting your limits and doing your thing. You don't just quit work. You don't stop working. You still work. However, it's not constantly monitoring your stress about every little thing. Oh, I'm stressed about this. I should quit. No, it's just it's accepting your limits and knowing when to stop when you're too overworked and you have way too many burnouts. And our PMN already stated that self-care activities are not used 24/7, but used for short breaks when the person needs them for relaxation to find calmness, so their claim does not stand. Everyone needs self-care. They need short breaks. It's not every time 24/7 monitoring your stress, looking at everything you do and changing everything. And this engagement doesn't mean it's negative, but rather it's what helps show the person's limits, which is extremely helpful to understand themselves in this journey of self-care. You need to accept your limits. You need to know when you're too depressed to work. You need to know when you're emotionally tired. You need to know your burnout. And also finding the root problems like the opposition claims. The root problem is overworking, depression, and stress. And self-care culture, we already stated, clearly helps them get over this. And also, you don't give up normal challenges. I already stated this so many times. The op is assuming what self-care is. It's knowing your limits, but still doing your job and helping your community. I'll talk about this more in my argument. My argument is about how self-care creates long-term resilience and fosters long-term resilience. It helps individuals come back from life-threatening events and depression. And also, they are able to build resilience in case of events in the future. This helps them prepare for future events of their lives, and this gives them boundary for themselves. Now, on Gov, we prepare them for the future for emotionally depressing events or life-threatening events. And rather than having them focusing on helping them others now, we help them build this resilience first. Then they can help others. You can't you can't help others without having resilience and a boundary first. People who go through depression without self-care and people who go through depression with self-care have one difference. The people with self-care are ready to fight the depression. They have already gone through self-care, they have trained themselves emotionally, and they are able to fight the depression. They are able to move forward with their life. Meanwhile, the people without self-care can't fight the depression. They have never ever thought about doing something for themselves. They've only tried to do something. They've overworked themselves. They have too much depression. They're emotionally unstable, and they're kind of just sitting at home staring at the wall because they don't know what to do anymore. People with self-care helps. Self-care is not like the opposition claims. They're assuming it's selfish. It's not. Self-care helps you evolve as a person. It helps you create healthier lifestyles, and it helps you have less stress. It's not selfish. It's just you caring for yourself. The ops arguments are built on the assumption that people will stop caring for other people. However, caring for because they care for themselves. However, our side has shown clearly that it is true that it's false. They will care for themselves and they will help themselves first. Then they'll move on to other people and help other people. And they will have less stress while still caring for others. And this isn't like the opposition assumes. It's true, and they are able to get through life-threatening events, like I already said, and they are emotionally stable. And they'll have less stress while caring for others. And for these reasons, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
I think before I start my speech, I think we need to say that proposition is debating under a world where they're preempting their assumption of what we're going to say, right? They said that they repeatedly in their arguments say that we are arguing firstly against self-care and we think it's selfish, right? We want to clarify that firstly we said we should have self-care, right? But rather it shouldn't become a culture, right? Because what does a culture mean? Culture means that a whole group practices it, shares it, and creates competition or conversation around it, right? And probably including often as part of, for example, if they can be accepted into a certain societal friend group or something like that, as is common with other cultures or other sudden phases of popularity, right? They said that we never said that. They said that we think that self-care is going to make people selfish or whatnot. We never said that. We said is that it diverts attention away from the actual problems, right? In our first speech, right? Because if we recognize, as they said, that the stress is because of work, then why are we ignoring it and oppressing it a lot of time because of the self-care, right? We are sending ourselves to think that by caring for yourself and suddenly you wake up on the next day, right? You're happy, right? But that doesn't mean that the work is not stressful, right? That doesn't mean that if you had like unfair amount of hours, we should that they can ignore it. But that's what often can happen because it being a culture now means that people think, oh, come on, just do some self-care and you can deal with it, right? So that is the problem, right? Now moving on to some rebuttals, right? No. They say that self-care can create health benefits, good habits. Yes, I think we co-opt all that, right? We say that self-care is fine. Even if everyone in the world practices self-care, it's okay. But the fact that it has become a culture and the popularity of it, which I'll explain why it's bad in later, is what is uniquely bad, right? Okay, moving on to my own points, right? If being a culture means that self-care is expected to be commercialized, and C, it means that it can reset the burnout expectation. First, the expectation, right? The expectation means that the average human is encouraged and expected to have self-care culture, right? It means that because because of its proposed benefits, then the people are expected to have better well-being, better emotional management, etc. When in reality, it cannot guarantee the user can just magically have a good mood, right? It means that it is expected as a society to have self-care to solve your problems. Therefore, you shouldn't be as angry as before. It also may involve critique if you do have a bad mood, because of the ideal marketed benefits that if you just do self-care, it will all be gone, right? Second is the commercialization. With this being a culture, it creates a massively popular market, right? It can cause many companies to excessively market the use of self-care, right? Why is this uniquely bad, right? Firstly, it sends a message that the more money that you spend can make you happier, which is very untrue. And then now you're spending more money when originally you could have spent that time and energy protesting against your work conditions or something like that, right? And secondly, promotes unneeded spending and competition on yet another industry, right? Uniquely on self-care, it shouldn't be made like that, right? It means it probably creates more stress. Imagine buying a yoga toy and then your neighbor compares theirs with you, right? Now multiply that magnitude to a whole country or more. Finally, it means that the companies or other things, it resets your burnout expectation, right? They think that because you have practiced so much self-care that they could push you to higher limits, because then even if you crashed out in the middle of your job, right, they can now blame that on you not having enough self-care, right? So in conclusion, we believe that we are not arguing that self-care is bad in any sense, but rather we are saying that it being a culture can create many unique deficits and negatives that allow these people to be more further burdened and have more stress in their lives. Thank you, and proud to oppose.
Yeah, judge, debaters, and panel, ask up with for the motion, this house supports the rise of self-care culture. I'll be giving the rebuttals and clashes, right? First off, rebuttals. They say that it justifies avoidance and causes the erosion of responsibility, right? This is clearly not true. Why? If this becomes a culture, right, everyone's just gonna like start to like know, and they're gonna understand, since it's like such a big culture, that it's just to help themselves, right? They're not gonna avoid work. They're not just gonna give up on like even like the smallest trivial things of life. Why? Because it's self-care. It's self-care, right? It's not leaving whenever you want to. It's not taking a break whenever you feel like a little bit stressed. Self-care culture, like my PM has already said, is knowing your limits, right? It's knowing your physical and mental limits and knowing when to stop. It's stopping at when you know that you're not going to get any sleep tonight by doing work. It's telling your boss no when he gives you like a ridiculously large amount of work for a promotion that's probably never going to come, right? Continuing on, they said that like people are gonna start giving up at normal challenges, which is clearly not true, right? Like I've already stated, right? They're not always just gonna be quitting on like all the little problems of life. It's knowing when to stop because you can't physically or mentally go on anymore. It's creating your own limits, not at like a low level, at like a high level. It's like it's setting a bar to like a point where you can go, and then you need to stop because you know that you're gonna have issues there with your physical or mental health, right? Then they say that we need to find the root causes, and we already find the root causes by having self-care culture, right? Why? Self-care culture, like I've already stated, is limiting yourself, but it's also saying no to things that you know that you can't do, right? Like going back to my example of like the boss promotion example, right? It also includes saying no. So no, the root causes are not like having a like finding the root cause is also a mutual benefit that our side has, right? Continuing on, they try to like say that self-care shouldn't be a culture, and then they start talking about monetization and how companies want money and start creating a like image that like the more money you have makes you like happier. This clearly makes no sense, right? So why does this make no sense? Because if it becomes a culture, right, like they have also already stated, lots and lots and lots of people are going to know what self-care culture is. They're going to understand it and they're going to be practicing it, right? I'd like to highlight that they're not practicing it every day like they framed. It's going to happen once in a while. No, thank you. Continuing on, so if they understand this and they're not going to be monetizing it, because the people actually practicing self-care are going to understand that this is not like the right way to do it, right? Continuing on, then they try to like justify this by saying that like bosses are going to start pushing people even further because they're going to assume that they're doing self-care, so they'll have higher limits, right? No, this is not true, because like I've already stated, if it becomes a culture, lots and lots of people are going to understand like the core concepts of self-care, including said bosses, right? So then, like I've already stated, the workers might also like decline these like ridiculously like large amounts of work. We also have a cool thing in our world, right? It's called fighting. It's not fighting back. What do you call it? Yeah, it's like the thing like yeah, it's called a movement, right? A peaceful movement when people like don't work under him or like you can leave jobs, and then you can also report the boss, right? Continuing on to my clashes. Clash number 1, right? Which side best promotes a better work environment? I'd like to highlight that this change happens over time. This is not sudden. This is a long-term and sustainable solution with self-care that we provide, right? It allows workers to create healthy boundaries with employers who constantly wanted to like work overtime, right? Why self-care, like I've already stated, encourages saying no to harmful / bad things. It fights the precedent that individuals must sacrifice their health or well-being for work, right? For example, a teacher not getting sleep to create slides for students, or like a 9-to-5 employee constantly working and not getting any sleep to finish a document, right? Clash number 2, which side best helps workers and employees deal with stress and overwork? We clearly win this clash. Why? Having self-care as a culture helps fight against overworking, because they learn to say no, right? The bosses will also understand that they are going to say no. They are going to decline when they give them ridiculous amounts of work. So no, they will not be providing this like large amount of work to these employees. Also, this also creates a better like me first lifestyle, which doesn't mean that they're going to be lazy, doesn't mean that they're going to quit on every problem. It just means that they're going to care and know the value that they themselves have, right? We're just supporting their health and well-being. We value things like students getting sleep compared to them completing a math homework assignment. We value their health and like their well-being over doing work or test grades, right? This doesn't mean that we put no value on test grades or work. We just mean that we believe that students should be, or like people should be, putting more work or value into themselves, right? Clash number 3, which side answers future problems with stress and overwork better? We clearly do this by creating a better precedent and culture, right? Not just having it, but as a culture allows for people to further understand it, to further follow it even more. So then problems like having bosses giving overwork isn't going to be true, right? For example, if you have like a midlife crisis, with this culture, with this experience, with this amount of people supporting you by understanding this culture, you can take breaks from work, right? Because the bosses are going to understand this, instead of having to constantly still go to work instead of grieving, right? Why? Because it becomes a culture. Thank you. Please vote for side problem.
As the third speaker of side opposition, I'll first start with rebuttals, and I'll move on to summarizing our points and finally the clash in conclusion. So now start with rebuttals. So proposition side say that they said how self-care isn't selfish, right? Which first of all we didn't mention in the first place, but let's assume that we did, right? You have to take care of yourself to take care of others and so on, right? But the saying that you can't pour from an empty cup is true, right? But that's sometimes. But self-care culture has twisted it into an excuse to step back from any responsibility that feels hard, right? Suddenly disagreeing with a friend become protecting your own peace or so on, right? Giving constructive feedback at work becomes toxic, and meeting a deadline becomes too much pressure, right? Like, do you know how lazy that is? And also they said that it's not constantly taking care of yourself, right? It's monitoring and it's accepting your limits, right? But your argument proves our point, right? Because you say self-caring is not about constantly monitoring. It's about accepting limits, right? But here's the problem. You can't accept your limits without monitoring them, right? Because if you're already constantly checking if you reach your limit or not, you are monitoring. And if you're like always ready to step back the moment you feel overly uncomfortable, you're avoiding and you're not accepting. The culture you're defending requires constant self-care. That's the opposite of peace. It's no, thank you. So they also said that they overwork themselves, and like if they don't, like they basically overwork themselves, right? And well, that's not the problem is the system, right? Not the person. If someone is overworking themselves, the solution should not just be more self-care, right? It's changing the conditions that force them to overwork. If self-care is a scar, right, you're just using a bandage to heal it. So this is why we win based on weighing, right? We win on impact, scope, and urgency because their benefits are small, fleeting, and only for the wealthy, right? And our harms are massive, lasting, and affect everyone. Temporary comfort for a few cannot outweigh permanent damage to the entire society as a whole. So now we'll move on to summarizing our points, right? And yeah. So first, self-care culture makes us blame ourselves for problems that aren't our fault, right? Because when people are burned out from overwork, high school pressure, or money problems, self-care culture tells them to fix it with bubble baths, journals, or meditation apps, right? It never asks why we're so exhausted in the first place. The wellness industry, no thank you, makes billions of dollars selling us quick fixes, but the real problem is bad working conditions, right? Unaffordable healthcare and impossible deadlines that never get solved. Even worse, when we're told just to protect our peace and step back, we stop fighting for changing together, right? Second, self-care makes us weaker, not stronger. When everyday stress, criticism, or hard work is treated as something dangerous to avoid, people will never lean in to handle life's real challenges, right? Resilience is built by facing difficulties like muscle that grows stronger with use, right? You can't just sit around in a bubble bath expecting you to grow stronger. But self-care culture teaches us to retreat, right? And social media praises us for cutting people off or choosing peace. Over time, we lose the ability to push through the hard things, right? School and workplaces also start lowering standards to protect the ability to protect feelings, which means students and workers aren't prepared for the real world in the future. So now I'll move on to the clash. So their clash that they propose is that the self-care culture will create a better future where bosses stop overworking employees because they respect workers' well-being and so on, right? And this is why we win. This future is a fantasy. Bosses won't change unless forced by unions or laws. They'll just add wellness apps and blame workers more when they're still burned out. Their future only helps the privileged who can afford therapy and time off, right? While the poor are left behind, blamed for not caring for themselves. Our future builds resilience by teaching people to face challenges and grow, while theirs builds fragility by encouraging avoidance of anything uncomfortable, right? The real crisis hits, right? Pandemics, wars, economic collapse, right? Fragile people break and change, while resilient people survive, right? Their future leaves systemic problems untouched. We demand real changes, right? The proposition offers temporary comfort for the few. We offer lasting strength for everyone. That's why we win. Thank you for the debate.
In my speech today, I'll be rebutting some of the points that we didn't do yet and prove how we win, right? So they say that by having this self-care, you can accept your limits and deny your boss, right, when they're pushing you too hard, etc., right? What that means is either you'll get fired because the boss is like a bunch of other people trying to get the same of your job, right? Or it means that you won't challenge yourself at all, right? Because sometimes you need to step into your stress zone, right? Right? What does stress mean? Stress and trying very hard can create more chances and create more products and probably make your life a bit better, right? Elon Musk sleeps 3 hours every day, yet that is what he wants, and we believe that self-care culture, if it was to exist, it would tell him off, right? It'll tell him that he's not caring enough for himself, but he doesn't care about that as much. He wants the best for his company. He wants probably the best for the world. I don't know. Right? So therefore, we suggest that, but also, as we already said, we go up to all the benefits of self-care itself, right? We can do that. We suggest that we should keep that quiet into yourselves, right? If you want to care for yourself, absolutely. However, being a culture either means people will tell the others off that they're trying too hard, or that people will just in general not try enough and just stop when they feel that it's slightly uncomfortable, right? More, as we already said, in a capitalist society, it means that bosses will interpret the culture as much to their side as possible, hoping that if they care for themselves at home, it can mean and they can expect that they can come to work with a full bottle, right? With a full cup to pour, even though they might not have that, right? So we believe, in conclusion, that self-care culture doesn't mean that on our side we don't say that self-care is bad. Rather, we want to emphasize again all of our points about the harms of it being a culture which are left neglected by proposition, and that is why we should win this debate. Thank you.
Side only assumes the worst for our side and tries to make our side look lazy and selfish. First of all, how is our side lazy? We already explained that it helps the community and the individual as a whole. How is this considered lazy by side opposition? Side opposition only rebuts and states the negatives of our side's arguments. Judge, what does this show? This shows that self-care activities on our side doesn't show any clear negative benefits, which side cannot state in any of their speeches. This debate comes down to one clear question: who loves the person and their whole society as a whole more? Why should we consider this the most important question? Because they are the stakeholders of this whole debate. When the person develops in calmness or confidence, like I stated before, it ultimately helps the society as well, because they can start contributing more aggressively for activities like throwing the trash away, doing homework together, lending the items for borrowing use, and even more simple activities. Even simple activities like this can contribute a lot to the community. Back to the question now. Who loves the person and the society more. Our side indefinitely wins this debate because we actually can answer this question. Our side helps the individual by improving their mental health, boosting their immune system, lowering their stress levels. Who wouldn't want these benefits? These can be all long-term benefits when self-care activities are prioritized with sustainability. But Judge, please note that our side is once again not saying these people will do these activities 24/7 and waste their whole day just for this, but rather using it just for short breaks when they need it. How does the side help the society now? I stated this in my speech already. Through the grown confidence and calmness, they can use those skills to help their community, which can actually help spread kindness and helpfulness throughout the whole community, thanks to just these small self-care activities. Side opposition only talks about companies earning money because their side doesn't serve any benefit for the individual or for the society as a whole. Our side wins in all circumstances, which helps the individual so much through building their confident and calm character in a long duration of time, even in the future, while also spreading this with the whole community, which improves the unique quality of the whole community as a whole. Side opposition never serves an actual benefit on their side because they don't have one on how self-care activities are not beneficial. So thank you for listening, and I'm so proud to propose.